Okay, welcome everybody to GEOTOP-A seminar, and today we have the pleasure to have Jacek Brodzki from the University of Southampton, and he will talk on topological insights into physical phenomena. Jacek, to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you all for being here. It's exciting. Where I am, it's 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon. So the weekend is not far from where I sit. For our friends in Mexico, it's still a while to go, but that's how it is with time zones. Right. Today, I would like to take up a little bit of your time with I hope interesting for you interactions between topology and especially topological data analysis and physical phenomena. We will consider the following. I would like to discuss the following question: how does topology, or what does topology tell us about the relation between the structure and function of physical systems? And I propose that we talk about time evolution. Then we will consider how to quantify disorder in physical systems, and then we will talk about complex systems in more generality. So let's get going. If there are any questions, just please stop me. I don't think I can see chat while I'm presenting, but just say something if you need to see, if you want to stop. All right. So our main tool here will be persistent homology, and I trust that the audience knows what it is. But just in case, let me just give you a brief illustration. So persistence homology has been designed to detect structure of shapes at a particular scale. For this talk, so persistent homology is a homology theory. For this talk, we will need just H0 and H1, and it works as follows. Your shape, or a sample of your shape, is fed into this machine. Then you can imagine that you create a covering with balls that grow at points that you sampled. Once they start intersecting, you create a nerve of that covering, and you record when you first saw it. So this is the birth of a feature. And as you keep inflating the balls, of course, you will just have one total simplex on all the points that you have created. The output of this procedure is, as we all know, a persistence diagram, which in this talk will be a subset of points in R2 arranged in this octant of the plane. Okay, so the horizontal line, the horizontal axis denotes the birth of a feature, the vertical axis denotes death of the feature. So in this particular case, we see that, so H0, of course, as always, captures the number of connected components. So to begin with, when the balls that we grow around these points do not intersect very well, we see many components, like when you see essentially where the diameter of the balls in the covering is 0, each point is its own component, and then they grow until they we see that there is one big component, and that's the signal we receive in degree 0. In degree 1, we detect loops. So this is the homology detects loops, and when the covering is good enough, you can walk around this shape through the balls of the covering, and you mark it with this one dot H1. So that very briefly is how persistence works. I trust, as I say, that this is known to everyone. So we will be interested in topological descriptors. So we will perform, our data will consist of time-dependent observations. So these are the measurements that you perform on your system. It can be many things. It can be some physical characteristic that you actually measure. In our case, these will be videos. So the input data will consist of videos, and that's that's what we will take as input. Out of that, I will explain how we will construct a family of time-dependent topological descriptors. So these, to begin with, these will be persistence diagrams. And then we will discover how to synthesize the information that they contain. And I will show you two things. One, a numerical descriptor, which we call structural heterogeneity, and another given by a low-dimensional embedding of the persistence diagram into, in this case, three-dimensional space. Okay, so we will talk about liquid crystals, and you may or may not know what a liquid crystal is. That's a very interesting state of matter, whose structure is between that of a crystal and that of a liquid. So it allows a phase in which the particles that make up the crystal are well aligned. It's typical that the liquid crystal molecules are actually oblong, like what you see in this picture, that they are longer in one direction and not so wide in the other direction. Then, as you heat or cool them, the order that you see disintegrates, and in the least organized state, they share properties with liquids. So on one end of their behavior, they look like crystals. On another end of their behavior, they are essentially liquids. And the liquid crystals are ubiquitous. They go into displays of all sorts. The computers you sit in front of possibly have liquid crystal displays. They live in digital watches, in pretty much any measuring equipment. And sorry, question? Okay. So you can modify the properties of liquid crystals through adding nanoparticles. So nanoparticles are small, tiny particles, and the properties of those substances change quite dramatically. As the picture illustrates here, it's possible to have a mixed existence of the two phases. So you see a coexistence of a well-organized phase and a disorganized phase. That's quite common, and I'll comment on this in what comes next. But it's for now, let's bear in mind that when those systems disintegrate, they retain some of their organization. And of course, the arrangement depends on temperature, other physical factors, and so on. They are very interesting substances and well worth knowing about. Okay, so 2 words to introduce here. There is isotropic and nematic phases. So isotropic is highly disorganized. So it says in this panel 1. And nematic is highly organized. The nanoparticles I mentioned can be introduced, like in this case, you add tiny balls of gold, which can act as seeds for the emerging order. So if you want the order to appear more quickly, you seed, or you dope is another name for it, the crystal with nanoparticles in this case, gold nanospheres. Nano means they of the sizes of the order of 10 to the minus 9 meters. And as you heat or cool your liquid crystal, it will evolve between the phases that you see, from disorganized to organized. And if you reverse temperature gradient, it will go back to the original state. So we teamed up with a group of physicists. I work with physicists at Southampton, and we teamed up with physicists in Warsaw. And they performed the following experiment. They have this liquid crystal in a tiny capillary. So this is a very narrow tube. So it's arranged along the axis of this tube. And then you stick this capillary between two polarizers under a microscope, and you shine light through it. Okay? Polarizers, in this case, the polarizers are arranged, the axis of polarization are at 90 degrees. So that means that when you arrange two polarizers like that and shine light through it, you should see no light, because one of the polarizers enforces orientation in one direction and the other polarizer kills that. Okay, so the data that you get is a video like this. So if you see light coming through, the background, as you can see, is black because of the two polarizers. And if you see light, it means that the liquid crystal through which this light passes changes the polarization. Okay, so here's the video that we got from our physicist friends. So let's see. So I'm showing this video to you because it, on the one hand, should be clear that something is happening. On the other hand, it's completely unclear what exactly is going on. And if I asked you to describe what just happened, I don't think you'd be able to do that very well, right? It's clearly a very subtle phenomenon that doesn't look very spectacular to a non-physicist. Our physics friends, however, they stared at this video for a long time, and they were very excited about this. They told us they could see in this little video I just showed you that they could see phase transitions happening. And you know that something is happening because the structure of the crystal changed completely. First, it was letting light through. At the end, it doesn't at all. So here's what we did. As I said, our physicist friends took a video of that. So we regarded this as a collection of still frames. So a typical frame would look like something like a picture that you see here in the middle. And then each frame is described by the luminosity of individual pixels. Pixels are arranged so that the luminosity is arranged from 0, which is total black, in integer steps to 255, which is pure white. So luminosity is an integer valued function on the pixels of your sensor that takes value in the set of integers between 0 and 255. Using that, you can create a filtration which you need to get persistent homology going. And the sequence of steps that you see at the bottom shows you what you see at particular stages of this filtration. The numbers of brackets tell you what luminosities you see. So at the beginning, you only see degree 0, which is just black pixels. Then 43 will show you black pixels and dark gray. You see your first loop here. And then as you allow the luminosity to increase, you see more and more loops. And at 255, you see everything. So a typical persistence diagram of the picture that you see on the left looks like this. It will have in this a number of features. You will see the value of luminosity at which this appears, and another value at which it dies, so the loop gets filled by another pixel, which is brighter than the ones you considered before. Okay, so just remember this. For each frame in this video, we have now a persistence diagram, which captures the state of captures the image, which we hope, and in fact that's the case, represents something about the physical state. So let's see if this is an improvement. So on the left is a video like before. On the right is the sequence of persistence diagrams corresponding to each frame. And well, on the left, the changes are quite subtle. On the right, persistence diagrams change quite a bit, quite significantly, and quite violently. All right? Okay, so this is feature 1. Excellent. So now we discovered that indeed, by assigning persistence diagrams to individual frames in this video, we have another way of tracing what happens in the evolution of this system. But how good is this? So let's take another system and let's see if the evolution is any different. I hope you will see that the persistence diagrams that you see on the right behave differently to the little movie I showed you just a moment ago. So this was a very strong hint that yes, we can use persistence to detect something about the behavior of these physical systems. And it seems that the signal that we have is strong enough to detect differences in the patterns of evolution. So just to summarize, what we're discovering here is that we have some snapshots in these videos which go between organized and disorganized states. And corresponding to that, we have persistence diagrams that look very, very different depending on what phase they're in. Okay, so this was a very strong clue. So now we needed to put together some numerical evidence that would convince our physical friends that topology actually can see what their physical system is doing. And this was done through a very, very simple-minded topological characteristic, which we called structural heterogeneity, but it's essentially the total lifespan of your persistence diagram. So I told you that each dot in the persistence diagram has 2 coordinates. BI means birth, DI means death. So this is BI is the value of your filtration parameter at which a particular feature appears, and DI is when it disappears. And when you take the sum of this over all points in your persistence diagram, you just get a number. You get one number assigned to this persistence diagram. So this, of course, means that you have lost a tremendous amount of information. But, well, let's see if that's any good. Given that we have one number for each frame in our video, we have a time-dependent scalar-valued function, which we can plot. And amazingly, when you look at what these what this little physical system does, we can see changes in the structural heterogeneity as it moves from the nematic to isotropic phase, and it looks a little different when it goes in the opposite direction, nematic to isotropic. So to remind you, and it took me a long time to remember this, nematic is the organized phase, isotropic is the disorganized phase. Okay, so you see that now that's exciting because now because each video frame is time stamped, you can see what's going on at a particular time. Now we have two things. We can plot the time dependence of our topological characteristic, the structural heterogeneity, as a function of time, and we can plot the physical characteristics of that. So it's clear that this function is constant for a bit, then jumps to another semi-constant value, this is less determined, then jumps again and drops down to another constant phase. In consultation with our physics collaborators, we were able to confirm that indeed these jumps in the value of this function do correspond to phase transitions. And we can see differences. We can see where in the video we have one phase, fully organized nematic phase. There is another phase where the two nematic and isotropic coexist in those domains of either order or disorder. And then we have the isotropic, fully disorganized phase, which exists on its own. So starting from the video, so before we joined the project, our collaborators wrote a very well-received physics paper in which they gave a qualitative description of those videos that I showed you to begin with. After we joined the project, we were able to create this very strong quantitative description, which shows you without doubt when interesting things happen and how to capture those moments. And with this in hand, you can see you can see the evolution of the system very clearly. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, check.
Yes.
I might have misunderstood. Can you go back to the slide where you had these two diagrams exactly? You know, the ones you just showed, the blue and the red diagrams.
Yes. Yep.
You said the red says, well, is capturing the nematic to isotropic
Yes.
transition. And the blue one...
Oh, sorry. Yes. The
okay.
captions are the same. That's a typo. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay then.
That's my mistake. No, it's meant to be, yeah, two different transitions. Okay.
Yes,
So
clear.
sorry about that.
And also regarding just the color coding,
Yes.
when you show the time evolution of
Yes.
your data here, exactly there.
Yes.
Yes. Can you remind me what is the red?
Red was supposed to be H0, but somehow the calculation gets a little messed up, and they seem to go outside of where you expect to see them.
But when I
red
see
was
red,
H0 and yeah.
Oh, I see.
Red was H0 and blue was H1.
Oh, I see. Okay.
All right.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, these are really cool pictures. I enjoy looking at them.
But also these diagrams, the one you just showed,
Yes.
are very beautiful.
This what is the significance?
Thank you.
What is the significance of the peak, like that sharp peak where you see the phase transitions right there? Yeah.
So that's an excellent question. So essentially, what you can deduce from that is essentially how quickly this changes. We have not been able to assign any obvious interpretation to the actual value of how high this goes. What's important is that this is a region where this changes very rapidly. So this is where the phase transition is taking place. So it's as if something was freezing or thawing. So that's what it is.
Right.
The significance in these more stable regions, the values have a very clear significance. It's not so much that the absolute values themselves, but the fact that you have regions where the value is essentially constant and distinct. So that's what's important, that you see. So while the actual value of this function we haven't been able to translate that into anything physical that we could describe. The fact that in this region the values are different is very relevant, because when our physicists look at the videos, they did confirm that in this region it's one phase, in this region it's another phase, and yet another phase in this region. And so I hope you now appreciate the fact that this function takes distinct values and remains constant. This is the strong signal.
Thank
you. The regions where the values change rapidly, this is where the phase transition occurs.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So there is one more piece of evidence that we can extract from this, and for that, I will use a little bit of geometry, which is based on metric properties of persistence diagrams, which again, I assume are unknown to you. So as you well know, there is a way of capturing distances between persistence diagrams by aligning, by using bijections to move one persistence diagram onto another. And we allow ourselves to add dots on the diagonal if one persistence diagram has more dots than the other. So essentially, the persistence, the distance, the famous bottleneck distance between persistence diagram captures the following. You define a bijection in the way I've just described, and you ask, so what's the worst displacement of a point in the persistence diagram? That's a number. And you take the infimum of those displacements, you take the supremum of those displacements over all bijections. Okay, so the worst case scenario that you need. Yeah. So this gives you a number known as the bottleneck distance, and that describes the distance between two persistence diagrams. Using that, we can create a distance matrix. So what you see here in these pictures are these are all, okay, so it's a matrix indexed by all the frames in our movie. So we had about 400 and something frames, and this heat map describes distances between frames. So blue means close, and red means some separation. Okay, means they further apart, or they are not so similar. And this is where we discovered something that wasn't known to our physicists. And if you look at the part of the video where you pass from nematic to isotropic, you get this beautiful pattern on the left. And if you go the other way from isotropic to nematic, you get another beautiful pattern, which is very different to the one previously. So this suggested that the system, when you heat it and you cool it, although it does get from one phase to another, so it would be like, for water, it would be like passing between ice and liquid, and then from liquid to ice again. The path taken by the system in one direction is not the same as the path taken by the system in the opposite direction in the configuration space of these events. Our physics friends didn't know that it's very natural to assume that the two parts of this evolution are symmetric, that if you go from one phase to another by heating and then you cool your system, it will essentially retrace its steps. That's not what's happening. And that this was discovered thanks to this topological and geometric insight. And in fact, once you have a metric space, you can use a low-dimensional embedding to represent what's going on in this evolution as a path in three-dimensional space. So here we have the if you like, the evolutionary path taken by the system. The red dots mean what happens, describe what happens as it goes from the nematic phase to isotropic, and the blue dots, what happens if it goes in the opposite direction. So that's exciting. That's, as I say, it does indicate something new about the time evolution of this physical system, which was not possible to be captured by simply staring at those videos, even if you are highly skilled, if you're a highly skilled expert in that. Okay, so that was our adventure of liquid crystals, and now is the second part of my talk, quantifying disorder. So any questions so far?
Yeah, Jacek, maybe again,
Yes.
if you go
Yes.
back to the heat maps,
Yes.
it's quite surprising. Well, I'm not terribly surprised by the fact that they are different because the system is not supposed to be completely reversible, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's yeah, I totally agree with you. That's a very natural hypothesis. What I'm saying is that that these heat maps provide a very clear evidence that that's actually true. So that this is no longer a hypothesis. You can say exactly what's going on at what timestamp. So this is why it's exciting. Yes, what you said is absolutely true, but and yes, our physics friends had numerous reasons for why this should happen, but this is unambiguous. We can see you know, this the heat maps and these embeddings, they show you roughly in what part of the configuration space your system carries out these various transformations.
I was curious.
Yes,
I was curious to hear your comments also on the kind of highly, you know, there are lots of symmetries in these diagrams. Especially, I'm quite surprised to see the right-hand diagram, isotropic to nematic, to see so much of this symmetry present there.
Yes,
it's quite surprising.
I know. So you see, yeah, absolutely. We stared at these pictures for a long time, and we extracted what information we could. I'm sure there is more. So all I'm saying is that I think the message here is that geometry clearly gives us more insights into the actual physics of the system, and that's exciting. And this is, if you like, these are no longer, if you like, hypotheses. We see evidence and we extract information from that, to the point where you can ask yourself, so is there any physical meaning to the shape of these curves? And surprisingly, yes. If you are careful about the embedding that you take, if you make sure that it's as close to isometry as you can make it, it will never be an isometry because one space is hugely dimensional and the other is just three-dimensional. If you calculate, for instance, the curvature of this curve, again, you get a numerical descriptor, which again correlates with what the system is doing. So the shape of these curves actually seems to correlate with the features of physical evolution. Okay. Now let me take you to another part of this talk, which is where we quantify disorder. So disorder is a fact of life. Okay. So whenever you build anything, you want to be able to control its properties. So for instance, you have a reflector that is supposed to work in certain wavelengths and do certain things and so on. So in order to do this, if you have any sensor at all, if you, for instance, have something like a sensor on your phone camera or sensor that detects light of a particular wavelength, it does so because it's well organized and we understand how the physical structure correlates with its response to any stimulus that you may provide. For instance, light that shines on it. Okay, if you need something that interacts with light of short wavelength, the typical size of characteristic features in your system is very small, and nanoscale, at nanoscale, where typical distances or sizes of those features is of the order of nanometers, that's you can make well-ordered materials, but that's very difficult. It's very difficult to control, it's very complex and tremendously expensive. It's essentially on that scale, quantum mechanics is against you. And that's just a fact of life. So we ask the following naive question. Imagine that you build a sensor that you know what you want it to do. Is there an acceptable level of disorder that you can live with? Can you make partially disordered the physical systems that still do something interesting? And more importantly, would you be able to know what amount of disorder is allowed? Okay, and so that was the motivation for this part of the project. And again, persistent homology will be our tool. So let me just briefly show you how to use persistence to classify configurations. So imagine that you build yourself a structure which consists of dots, where on the left they arranged in squares, and those squares are repeated in some way. Okay, as you can see, we are not particularly careful to align them precisely. We just distribute them within the frame. And we make two configurations out of squares. Okay, and then we have another configuration, but this time we arrange our dots into triangles. And again, so these are meant to be equilateral triangles arranged in some form. Again, we are not particularly careful about the where we put those triangles, but we make two such configurations consisting of triangles. So from the point of view of persistent homology, you'd think immediately that there isn't that much difference between a 4-point square and a 3-point triangle. After all, both look like crude samples of a loop. So a guess would be that if you do persistence, you on these configurations, you wouldn't get much information, or if anything at all. But that didn't stop us. So we actually computed persistence diagrams for these various configurations. All right, so you see the position of persistence diagrams on the right corresponds to the position of the configurations on the left. And okay, you look at them and you see, all right, so there are some differences, but how significant are they? Okay, so now that we know how to calculate distances between persistence diagrams, we just do it. So we have 4 persistence diagrams. So a distance matrix is very, very simple. It's just a 4x4 matrix. But, a 4x4 matrix still is useful. And, whoops, sorry. So what we discover through a similar two-dimensional embedding to what I showed you just a moment ago when we described the evolution of the system, that after you embed this distance matrix into a two-dimensional space to see how it looks, the two squares, the two configurations with the squares are closer together than the two configurations with the triangles. So squares are close to squares, triangles are close to triangles, and there is a visible separation between the two. Okay, I think that this is a cool little example that shows you that, yeah, persistence is suitable if you use it right to describe to capture differences between configurations of points. So what is it that we are trying to understand? When people build meta surfaces, so that's essentially, these are essentially two-dimensional distribution of particles, they mean the following. You can either have a system of nanoparticles which essentially distribute on the surface of some substrate on which they live, and you allow them to organize themselves. Amazingly, there are systems that will do just that. So on the left, here's an example of a self-assembled metasurface. You can, for instance, put you can join these nanoparticles using strands of DNA. DNA is very good. It works like tiny springs. So you can use it for that. It doesn't have to be human. It can be any DNA you can find. And on the right, you see metasurfaces that have been designed. You want to build them in a particular way. So you, for instance, you can etch a surface using laser beam, or again, you can distribute nanoparticles, but in a way that it gives you an element of control over where they will go. So whether you look on the left or on the right, I hope you see that these are not ideally organized systems, that they show a degree of structure, but a lot of disorder as well. Okay, and this paper by Sterl and his collaborators was a motivation for our contribution to this project. So this is what we did. We wanted to understand how to capture disorder through some topological descriptors. So a disordered lattice can be described as an arrangement of points. So I hope you can imagine that an ideally organized lattice system is an ideal lattice. Okay, I'm sure you can imagine a two-dimensional lattice. So disordered lattices have two parameters. S, which is the disorder strength. So that's essentially says it's a measure of the standard deviation in the distribution that you use. If you have a lot of disorder, you will cease to see any underlying configuration, any underlying ideal structure. Now, correlation length aims to describe is, if you're a dot, does your position in the lattice, is that influenced by your nearest neighbors at all or not? Okay, so longer disorder length essentially allows you to smooth out this local disorder to the point where you begin to see some kind of deformed lattice emerging. However, for any particular value of the disorder strength and any particular value of correlation length, you will have infinitely many distinct configurations, simply because this is a probabilistic event. So every time you generate a lattice with a particular disorder strength and a particular correlation length, you will get something which looks different. Okay, well, so let's see if that's useful at all. So in my previous example, you've seen that we had some success with structural heterogeneity, so we will remember that we should use that. But there is also persistent entropy, which is constructed out of those correlation lengths, and which takes the length of each interval in the persistence diagram and uses that as a kind of information theoretic parameter. So we assemble that in a formula which resembles any number of formulae for entropy. And yes, L again is the total length of all the segments in the persistence diagram, and persistence entropy is given by this logarithmic expression. So persistent entropy resembles something known as Gibbs entropy, and it's maximal. So it kind of works backwards. It's maximal when the when the length of each persistence interval is constant. So this is satisfied, for example, for periodic lattices. So it measures how ordered, not how disordered, it measures how ordered the lattice is. It's actually invariant with respect to rescaling of the lattice, which is very important because it may be that it may seem that big lattices and small lattices would be different, but not. You can rescale, and that's fine. And the maximum, where it attains its maximum, doesn't depend on the shape, which is good because it feels like it's more a topological measure, so it can be applied to the disorder of any point cloud. And one more piece of terminology: topological disorder. So this is a very useful measure of a universal measure of disorder for any system. Omega here is the total number of topological features, so it's essentially the number of points in your diagram. And this topological disorder that reverses the behavior of persistence entropy. So now it attains a maximum for disordered systems. Do not worry if you can't pass this formula. I will not use it explicitly, but I will describe it to you in pictures how it can be captured. So topological disorder is a number. So as I say, if that will allow you to do the following. Imagine that you create very many lattices of a particular correlation length. I already told you that what comes out is very, very different. So topological disorder, when you calculate it for each lattice separately, you get this. So this is the heat map here. You get a very nice gradient. So even in a particular, even if you fix the statistical parameters, the actual the lattices that you get will have different values of topological disorder. And here is another example. So this is, yeah, sorry, my mistake. This is colored by structural heterogeneity, and this picture is colored by topological disorder. All right, so this is a very clear gradient given by topological disorder. So that indicates that among lattices generated for the same values of statistical parameters, you will have lattices with more or less topological disorder. So an obvious question is that useful for anything at all? Well, the answer is yes. Okay, so one reason why these systems might be interesting is that they exhibit a strong response to some physical signal. So here is an example. These are all calculated, but nevertheless, they illustrate very well what a physical system would do. And in fact, there are experiments that confirm that that's what happens. So imagine that you have three lattices with low topological disorder, intermediate topological disorder, and maximum topological disorder. These curves indicate how strongly a light would interact with the lattice that you see here, okay? And a strong dip suggests that there is resonance. If the lattice were perfectly ordered, this resonance would be very strong and very sharp. That's when that's where you light, if you like, interacts most efficiently with the system that you have built. But here, look what happens. If you have low topological disorder, this is the blue curve here with a deep minimum. There is a clearly very good resonance between light signal and the lattice. The bottom axis that show you at what wavelength this happens. Intermediate disorder is illustrated by by the curve in the middle, okay? So the orange curve, and the maximum amount of topological disorder shows there is still an amount of resonance, but it's much weaker and happens at a different wavelength than before, okay? So this, if you like, that's a clear indication that topological disorder is a useful parameter to capture what a particular disordered system would do when interacted with light. Okay, these are already, if you wanted to build a sensor, you would discard all of these configurations because they're just not good. You would say, this is not going to do anything useful, right? So now this is a tremendously exciting part. These pictures may not look like much, but here's what we did. We actually, out of all those thousands of randomly generated lattices, we selected some which exhibit minimum topological disorder, and we actually made them. So what you see on the left is no longer a simulated lattice. It's an actual physical lattice, which is built out of nanodots, like what you see on the right. And that's an act on the left. It's an actual physical object that we made. Well, not me personally, because I have no idea how to do this. Well, I know how to do. I know the idea of how you do it, but no, you ask the physicist to make it for you. And so the picture on the left is an actual physical lattice. So these are etchings made in gold foil. So we made a number of those. So these are pictures from a scanning microscope of actual physical lattices that we built. So here's the disorder strength, high topological disorder, and low topological disorder, and so on. So we have some parameters same. So we have three values of statistical disorder strength. Okay, for each of those, we have high topological disorder, okay, and then we have low topological disorder. And here's what we did. So we did these curves now represent what light is actually doing when it bounces off these lattices, okay? So if you calculate, you can compute the response of a perfectly ordered lattice. You can compute this, and this has been confirmed in numerous experiments that the calculation will tell you what the ordered lattice will do. So the black curve here is the expected signal of a perfectly ordered lattice, okay? The solid red line is high topological disorder for one value of the statistical strength, and the dashed line is low topological disorder. Okay, so if you look at these pictures in the middle, the system with low topological disorder behaves essentially very similar to an ordered system. Increasing correlation length clearly smooths out the system to the point where it behaves more and more like an ordered system. So this, my friends, for us, this was a tremendously exciting development, because as far as we can see, that this is one of the first examples of using topology to actually make something that you will, whose physical behavior you will be able to predict. So in other words, we have demonstrated that our characteristics, persistence, entropy, and topological disorder can quantify the level of disorder. The method is very general, will apply in a number of diverse systems. And we use this to create actual physical examples of the system, and we demonstrated that they behave as predicted. So that's exciting. I have one more short section to talk through, if you still have time. But for now, do you have any questions?
I suggest to go on, and we still have some time, please.
All right, excellent. So now, these will be concluding remarks about complex systems in general. And the approach that we take is geometric, but we will retain the geometric insights that we learned, and we will attempt to see if there are any other methods than just persistent homology that we could use. So image analysis was part of this talk. So on the left, you see a pixelated image of a beautiful bird, which was painted by my sister, in fact, who studies Japanese painting. So she painted that. So we scanned this and we pixelated it according to luminosity, so the gray value of each pixel. On the right, you have the gradient field. So that's essentially the gradient, the discrete gradient of the luminosity of this picture. So this is now a vector field. Well, a vector field on one space, that's an element of some normed vector space, and you can use any number of norms on that vector space to measure distances between those vector fields. And the question is, if you have many pictures like this, is this useful for anything? Okay, so this is interesting because there are numerous situations in which this might be helpful. For example, if you track weather conditions, typically you will have some region whose weather condition you summarize with some vector of descriptors. So if you have our beautiful planet, at any time, you will have a vector field on it, which corresponds to the measurements that you have made, and each vector is a vector of descriptors of that particular region. Okay, you do not have a vector for each point on Earth, of course, because we do not have so many sensors. So we have this simplicial approximation that we use to predict the state of weather on the planet. So just like before, we can actually use this for time evolution of either scalar valued functions that describe the state of a particular region. So in this case, we simulated that using solutions to the Ginzburg-Landau equations. And equally, you can take the time evolution of a system described through gradient vector fields along the lines that I just described using that wonderful bird picture. And you can calculate distances between vector fields by simply, for each domain in your system, you take the norm of the difference of your vectors, and you integrate over your whole system. And then once we have this metric, we can embed this using some low-dimensional projection, for instance, through multi-dimensional scaling. And we can embed that into low-dimensional space and study what it does. So we did that for Turing patterns, which are beautiful. And we have one semi-regular pattern and some chaotic pattern. So I urge you to look up Turing patterns because they're wonderful. They correspond to, they're ubiquitous in many physical systems. And the point is that this approach also allows you to capture the difference between a regular pattern, like you see with the stripy system in the middle columns, and a more oscillating chaotic pattern. And the shape here will allow you to capture the shape of the attractor of your system. And that, I believe, is everything I wanted to say, other than to mention names of people who took part on this research. Our physics friends led by Małgosia Kaczmarek, and our postdocs Marina van Rossum, Tristan Madeleine, Ingrid Membrillo Solis, and was a main team member who designed a lot of these numerical experiments. And the three of us, Gianpaolo D'Alessandro, myself, and Małgosia, designed and led this team with help from Tatiana Orlova. And yes, Leverhulme Trust was kind enough to sponsor this, and this is where I can stop. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacek. A very, very beautiful presentation. Questions from the audience, please. If I may, I have a question, Jacek.
Please do, yes.
Please go back to the heat map of the pneumatic and isotropic system. And yes, exactly. When I look at the diagram on the right, I assume that the geometry of the oblate molecules influences greatly the pattern we see, because I assume, thinking as if they were mechanical ellipsoids, that there are regions that are forbidden and regions that are allowed or even prone to order. Can you comment on that? Because I think
absolutely, you're absolutely right. This is so. Just for simplicity, let's assume that this thing essentially freezes and thaws like water would, but instead of having our standard water molecules, we have those cigar-shaped things. So they stick together when they freeze, and they sort of float apart when they thaw. So indeed, what you're saying is absolutely right. The shape and configuration of these molecules clearly should indicate how easy it is, for instance, to arrange themselves in a particular way. So for instance, if I'm a molecule and I need to rotate to align myself with other molecules, but everyone else around me has already arranged themselves, there may not be room for me to do that, right? Because I may not be able to rotate. So, and going the other way, absolutely, again, I expect that things will break along some regions where the heating, for instance, may be, for whatever reason, faster than around. So, absolutely, this was definitely one of the strands in our discussion that we considered. It would be interesting to see if we can encode some kind of symmetry of those molecules in these descriptions, because just as you say, it stands to reason that that affects the behavior of the system and indeed what it can do. So that's a good insight. It's physically, it's a subtle question.
Sure, it is. And I wonder also the related question, that is the amount of packing is again a packing problem in going to certain limits, and that is also quite interesting for possible applications. And
okay. I agree, and I believe that that's what our heat maps illustrate to some point. That so, for instance, in these red regions, most of the time the configurations seem to be quite distinct. Here we go through similarities that occur far more quickly, it seems, right? So blue means similar, red means dissimilar. So yes.
Thank you. Questions, please. If we have no other questions, I thank you very much on behalf of everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation.
Well, thank you again for your kind invitation. Thank you for being here. And yes, excellent.
Thank you.
Have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend when it comes.